This next question is, can Latter-day Saints write things that are real and authentic? Which is something that I think sometimes we, don't allow ourselves that grace, um, because we have a reputation for being just too gosh darn optimistic and naive. And I think that is like as a people culturally, but also like the way that we appear in general, both American and globally, like how Mormons are portrayed, but also how Mormons, I think, want to be portrayed to a certain extent. That there's this that we want to put on this image of happiness and we are seeking after perfection in all things. So there's a certain level of making those appearances as, we want to be as shiny and happy as possible, and we want to hide away the things that are more difficult. But literature and art and theater are all about kind of like exploring who we are through those things that are more difficult. And sometimes that's uncomfortable for people. Sometimes the job of an artist is to make people uncomfortable. But yeah, that's I think the question is, can Latter-day Saints write things that are real and authentic?
Yeah. We get this question a lot too.
Yes, we do.
And
Yes, we do.
sometimes it comes up in mainstream media. Um, there was a New York Times piece not that long after you and I met, I think. I think it was early 2010s,
Mm-hmm.
where the headline was something like Mormons offer cautionary tale in sunny outlook versus literary greatness, right? The
Right,
idea
right.
that like
That
our
that phrasing,
community,
yeah. Sunny outlook versus
literary greatness, I
literary
think was
greatness.
the,
Yeah.
yep.
Yep.
And so I don't know. I think that that's just cheap thinking though from the
Hmm.
outside to take us up and say, "Oh, here's a cautionary tale. Here's a lesson for you about these
Hmm.
people." And it's pretty rich from people who are sometimes maybe closing the door
Yeah.
Latter-day Saint literature in the more literary side, right? Like
Hmm.
doors were open to us in the places where we told different kind of stories that weren't open other places. It's also lazy because we have a long tradition of telling really complicated stories,
Right.
um,
Right.
but we don't always get acknowledged for that. And then I think within the community, yeah, we have this sense. Um, I work for church history. You and I were there for a while together.
Hmm.
And I've given presentations before. It's been a minute, but when I started there many years ago, I gave several presentations about how the church spent the late 20th century, well, most of the 20th century, in kind of a broadcast media era. So in the
Hmm.
early days, culture and stories were mostly passed on orally. We had, of course, a lot of print media too. But the way you learned about Joseph Smith in the early days was, I mean, you met him, people talked about him, and
Yeah.
it's really to the end of the 1800s. There's still wards were in testimony, meaning people were getting up and telling Nauvoo stories, right?
Right.
And then in the 20th century, there's changes in technology, and the church is growing in a way where broadcast media becomes the big thing.
Yeah. The radio.
Yep, radio, then TV, and in that era, the way people message is have like one, here's an idealized image that we like send out.
Hmm.
And I think everybody did that. We might have done it double in terms of
Yeah.
how idealized our image was because we have, at really aspirational ideas for ourselves about what we want to do as a community, how we should live individually. We wanted to be more accepted in the larger society and have people see us as respectable. And
Hmm.
so we had some other motivation to say, no, no, really, we're all the good things, right?
Right.
There were all these pressures on that story. And then that story that was coming out, usually through church channels, right? It kind of reinforces itself. And then I was saying, now in this century, we're in this digital media era where there's tons of different stories and a diversity of different stories. And people are more used to complicated stories because you don't just have the short ad time, right? People
Hmm.
are experiencing sort of a kaleidoscope of things, and there's room for that. So um, theologically, I think we've always been called to tell these complex stories. Doctrine and Covenants 132 that tells us some of what exaltation is says it's to inherit all heights and depths.
Hmm.
And so so I think it's like important to what we believe that
Yeah.
we learn to tell about the scope of things. And then yeah, it is, in addition to being important, it's like practical. Like people are hungry for those kinds of stories. But I think it's taken us some time to have more people getting the confidence to
Hmm.
not care what the broader society thinks and also not care what your most guarded ward member might think.
Yeah.
and and find the way to tell that complicated story in the middle. That said, I would say, like, really anything in this pile, that's a
Yeah.
lot of what I'm doing, and I'm not the only one doing this, right? There's tons of
Right.
people doing this,
Hmm.
and even what's published um, by the church and in Deseret Book, I think the average has shifted significantly. There's at least a lot more room for
Hmm.
stories that are complicated. I was working on a history project where we told very short stories from different countries around the world. And that was
Hmm.
kind of an opportunity also to tell stories about different aspects of human experience.
Yeah.
And in the profile on Cote d'Ivoire in West Africa, we told a story about a guy who serves a mission and sees his companion get stabbed in front of him. And it's kind of a PTSD story, right?
Uh-huh.
Of we follow him afterwards. What did it take? What which things felt weird because of this,
Hmm.
right? What were the
Right.
triggers? How did he think through how this, like, why did God let this happen? And what does it mean for me? But I think we're in an era where we're more interested, even in the Latter-day Saint literature side, let alone
Hmm.
the Mormon literature part, in engaging with that stuff. So we can do it.
Hmm.
Uh, we were spiritually called to do it, and we do it. Uh, Readers who ask that question need to read more,
Right.
I think,
Right.
is the main answer,
And that's
right?
the main answer. That there's a lot of things, there are a lot of things in the field. Like if you hold up that stack again, hold your stack up again, James. Like if you look at all of the things that James has written and created, and there's so many things also that he has on the web. And if you go to Wayfair, is it wayfair.org and read some of James's essays and fiction and poetry that have been published in that journal. Like I actually think the interesting thing about authenticity is that good writing allows people to meet folks that they are unfamiliar with, as well as people that they are shocked sometimes to know. Like, I know this person, I know these characters. And I think that's one of the joys of Mormon literature, of good Mormon literature, is to be like, there's a familiarity there. Because what you were saying earlier, like there are so many things, assumptions that we make, but things that we know because this is who we are and what we believe. Um, but also, I think that the second part of that question is like, are Mormons too optimistic and naive to be authentic? And I think when we allow our characters and our stories to be authentic, there is an optimism that comes out of that naturally, that comes, it's based in our faith, that the
Yep.
optimism is actually fueled by our authenticity, that if we are open to sharing those stories that are more complicated, we have the knowledge that is founded in our faith to be optimistic about where our lives are going and where things are headed and the progress that we're making eternally.
And I think we're in a social, cultural, and political moment in broader society in
Hmm.
many parts of the world now
Yeah.
where that optimism is really called for too.
Yeah.
And it
And
needs
sometimes
to
it's
be a
hard. Sometimes
grounded
it's harder.
optimism, right?
Yeah.
That it's not a flimsy cheerfulness, but it's
Hmm.
if you think about the Alma in the Book of Mormon at the Waters of Mormon, they
Hmm.
they come in and they say we're going to mourn with those that mourn and comfort those that stand in need of comfort. And I think those
Hmm.
are different, right? I'm
Right.
interested in literature that can mourn with those that mourn and kind
Hmm.
of weigh what are we up against.
Right.
But I don't just want my writing to do that and leave somebody. It's good for somebody to feel seen and recognized in their struggles, the struggles of the world, but I think it's worth it to give somebody something to hold on to, right? I
Hmm.
think that
Yeah.
yeah, the
Yeah.
gospel optimism, when you can ground it right, when you can
Right.
channel it right, is a valuable thing. And maybe
Yep.
historically we haven't taken it seriously enough, right? We've
I agree with that.
associated
Hmm.
serious literature with the sort of discouraging, depressing with deconstruction of
Hmm.
things, and we maybe haven't paid enough attention to literature that's kind of forging new stories for us and helping
Hmm.
us rebuild, hold on to something again.
Right.
But I think we need that in our community. I think we need that in the world.
I totally agree, and especially at the time that we're living in. But also, I think there is something to be said for that optimism is it's hard. It's harder. It's harder to write things that are um that are more not uplifting necessarily, but that are more positive, and yet
Yeah.
you want to be positive, but you want to balance that so that it's not, smarmy. Like it's difficult. It's a very difficult thing.
Yes.
And sometimes it's easy to just be dark and dreary and heavy and serious and think, look at me, I'm being such a good writer. I'm being so literary. When really I think sometimes that's actually easier and sometimes a little more lazy to just be like, oh, everything is wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
yes. Yeah. I feel that obligation that you need to be able to look into the darkness long enough, right? It's that I
Right.
think that, okay, here's the thing to play with. The writer's fundamental obligation is don't look away. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we look at the dark and we look away and we pull the quick cheerfulness, right?
Yeah. Right.
But sometimes, right, we look in the dark and then we look away before we get to the questions of how things continue. Let me read two poems
That'd be great.
that I
Do it.
think show, and these, I do have works that do both in one thing. This one might be what we're going to do, one dark and one light,
Okay.
um, but they go together. So this one is the opening poem to a book of Lamentations, which is
Well, see,
like,
that's appropriate
that's my
for dark.
2020 book, right? We were going through a lot. And what I really felt like for this one is we need a spiritual vocabulary for that intensity. And the
Hmm.
Bible has it, right? That's
Right.
why I got Lamentations on there.
Right.
But let's use the whole piano, right? Not just a few pretty notes on the high end. So the opening poem to this book is called The Book of Mormon Was Written for Our Day.
Mm.
A voice from the dust for a nuclear age, for a world leaning into its climate's change, for men gone mad with homicidal rage which cannot be quenched with children's blood. For us, a lonely prophet carved Coriantumr's fate into plates of tarnished gold. This is the truth he buried beneath us, that we are so very capable of choosing death and choosing it and choosing it and choosing it until we grow numb, until even beaten, broken, breathless, our bodies will strain toward the consuming violence of a total self destruction, right? Like that's,
Yeah.
we're just looking at it, but we're looking at it in our language. And I think if you've had experiences with the Book of Mormon, there's an extra power to the poem because it's
Hmm.
drawing on what you already have, right?
Right.
But then take this other poem. This is called Resilience. This is
Hmm.
from Phoenix Song, which is maybe a good book for this.
Resilience.
So this is
Yeah.
my, there's a lot going on in this book, but it's mostly my cancer poetry book is the way I think
Mm.
of it. That I spent a year in progressively intensive chemotherapy and went through a lot. And so it's about what it's like to feel kind of burned down and then rebuild.
Hmm.
And after all those poems, we've got this one called Resilience. Eating the fruit from Lehi's dream, the very marrow in my bones fills up with light. You can't imagine all the maladies a little love in the bones can shield you from. And I think that's something, right? And this, I mean, I was thinking about marrow and bones because
Hmm.
the part of my bone marrow that produces white blood cells was wiped out twice. I had
Yeah. Oh
two
gosh.
stem cell transplants by the time I
Hmm.
got back, right? So like,
Yeah.
yes, there are all these maladies, but it's just this little bit of light. Like, how transformative is that?
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I like a literature that encompasses all heights and depths and gives us the
Hmm.
power of both.
Right.
because we've vicariously been through it.
Right. No, I appreciate the contrast of those two poems because it's like the Book of Mormon poem has such a starkness that like and even if you because you were talking about it from the perspective of being familiar with the Book of Mormon, but even if you're not, if you haven't read the Book of Mormon, the truth of it, especially today in the age we are in politically and historically, specifically in this country, like to think about the that hits home really hard, even if you don't have the Book of Mormon reference.
Yes.
And then if you add the Book of Mormon layer, it's just kind of like but yeah, what you were saying earlier about, not looking away and not flinching, and it's the writer's job to not flinch. Because sometimes, the reader can put the book down and walk away. The writer doesn't have that luxury because
Yep.
someday that reader is going to pick that book up again. And I think the difference, the contrast is so interesting that the one is longer and darker and more, a little bit more, this is a technical term, but just a little bit more, ugh, like there is a weight to it, you know? Um,
Yep.
Meanwhile, resilience is it's a shorter piece. It's about light, but it is also light and optimistic in a way
Yeah.
that the first poem is much darker and a little more grim. And so they
Yep.
they do have a very interesting it's a great pairing because the
Yeah.
juxtaposition just kind of, lifts them both up a little more. So thanks for sharing those.
Yeah. And
Um,
everybody feels it. I think writing craft is, yeah, can you taste the language? Can you
mhm,
feel how to make the language that intensive, obsessive dark and that light, right? And
right.
that's not just, yeah, there's a lot of ingredients that go into that, but we need people to do that. One
Hmm.
of the things I get as feedback on pieces fairly frequently is thank you for putting this into words
Yeah.
because it's not a fundamentally different thing than something somebody else has intuited this,
Hmm.
but to get it all the way articulated, to have somebody who can keep staring and get you there, help somebody else feel their way the rest of the way into that.
Yeah.
But it's a huge, and that's why I say, right, like I'm good being Mormon first.
Hmm.
Writing is a tool in my Mormonism that
Right.
helps me continue this spiritual objective and finish it through.
Hmm.
And it becomes a tool of ministering then, but
Yeah.
in both the mourning and the comforting, right?
Right.
Because we need the dark and light.
Well, you need to be aware of them both. Like, I mean, faith is faith because there is doubt. They're two sides of the same coin. Like, we don't know what light is if you don't have darkness. Like, those things
Yes.
are, it's a
Yeah, like this is
fundamental
Lehi,
thing.
right?
It's like
Opposition
how it
in
goes
all
together.
things and that.
Opposition in all things, that's something that, that writers need to be very aware of. I mean, that idea of optimism, I mean, sometimes I think the difficulty with optimism as an idea is that if it's just alone, it's shallow. There's got to be layers to it. And there has to be reasoning that, we're pointing towards something more positive. Anyway,
And no, yeah, how do they like braid together? So we have these
mhm,
dualities and they become somehow one, right? I think
You need a
the
little bit of both. Yeah.
yeah, heights contain depths, right? And depths are aware of heights, and
You can't have the one without the other. It's not
yeah,
possible.
the resilience doesn't exist without the maladies.
Hmm.
Um, I was thinking as we're talking about dark and light, so Song of Names is
Hmm.
a collaborative book I did with Artist Partial. There's a couple
Yes.
other, Scott Hales has a guest poem in there, Mary Jane Rice has one, but mostly Artist and I took different stories from church history of people she was particularly interested in, or a few I was particularly interested in. And we wrote these like historical introductions, poems, and then like devotional meditations on each.
Hmm.
Um, but one of the stories that I brought to the conversation was one. There's a city called Manaus that's like way up the Amazon in Brazil. So it's in the rainforest where the Negro and the Solimões rivers come together.
Hmm.
And one of them is like sandy. And so the water's actually light.
Okay.
And the other one is kind of deep and the water's dark. And there's
Mm.
a moment where they come together where you can see the two colors in the river, like through Manaus, before they're mixing and becoming integrated, right?
Right.
Um, and there's this wonderful story about members from Manaus deciding the first time, how are we going to put together a caravan to go together to the temple in Sao Paulo? So we're going to go
Mm.
way upriver and through the Amazon rainforest and whatever. But I've got a poem about that caravan that plays with this dark and light.
Hmm.
The path to God has at least one beginning, where dark and sandy waters meet, where light meets dark and grace meets sinning. The path to God has at least one beginning. Sail up to the heavens where stars are spinning. Take a taste of eternity, savor the sweet. The
Hmm.
path to God has at least one beginning where dark and sandy waters meet. I think that's part of what's drawn me to the history of the church. I'm
Hmm.
more interested in church history, like, I don't know, almost aesthetically, as here are examples of people who are playing with through their lives these human challenges and dilemmas with how different aspects of experience mix. And so I'm not looking at like how do we evaluate this or that historical figure and how
Hmm.
do they stand up to scrutiny. I don't care, right? What I care about is like what did they go through and how can we connect to them
Hmm.
on this level that is both emotional and evocative, that
Right.
transcends, it contains their experience and transcends their experience.
Hmm.
Um, and how can our past unlock the human within us
Right.
and open up different doors to what it means to be a soul, a spirit in
Hmm.
a body on earth?
Hmm. Well, I think what you just said about history is exactly what we look for in literature, is this idea of you want to associate with the character the way that you're looking for the character in the historical figure, because that's what we as humans, we are storytelling is innately in us because we are connecting to each other as humans. And we look for that in story and we look for that in history. And I think that's what you're saying about like finding that soul and connecting to that soul. I mean, there is a really wonderful truth that comes with it being a real person, historical person who has lived and existed. But I do feel like that's that's strikingly similar to what we look for in a good character in a story.
I would say, as a community, we've invested a lot in history, and I think
Hmm.
that's good.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's meant we are out of balance between our investment in one set of approaches to history, which is
Hmm.
primarily like the academic historians approach, where we're mostly saying, how do we determine what's true? How can we like evaluate sources,
Yeah.
kind of assess what happened? And then the sort of sociologists, right? The how do we assess that? How do we recognize structures of power and analyze that? And yeah, sometimes there's some like moralizing around that. Maybe that set of approaches to history has influenced us more than is useful. And
Mm.
the a necessary complement to that is the literary approach to history,
Hmm.
right? Coming with that thing you described that is fundamentally about finding human connection and understanding human experience. I
Hmm.
don't think that is the key ingredient in the training for academic study of history.
Right.
I hope that's the key ingredient of like a journeyman writer's experience, right? As you're
Right.
coming of age as a writer,
If it's
and
not about anything else, if it's not about character, what is it about?
what is it about?
Hmm.
And so I feel like our community as a whole would be better served if we found out ways to give people the writer's experience. If
Hmm.
we found out ways to sharpen that sensibility, we
Mm.
would have a healthier experience with our past and we would have more material to deal with the diverse and changing challenges of the present.
Yep. Yeah, that's great.
So we don't just need universal stuff. We need particular stuff because we live in particularity. And sure, there's a risk we could be too optimistic and naive. That's because we didn't train writers. We didn't give people the room to become authentic, to spend the time to not look away. And as we
Hmm.
do those things, it doesn't just get us a handful of good books, it fosters a sensibility that is going to help our community
Hmm. Yep.
continue to be a community through a time where the forces of atomization are strong. I
Right.
think we need the writers. I
Yep.
just do. And yeah, I'm a writer. Of course, I'm going to say that. but I'm a writer because I think we need that, not
Right.
because I wanted to be a writer and I happen to also be a Latter-day Saint.
Well,
Okay.
I think it can seem like a very lonely thing sometimes as a writer to be like, am I the only one that's noticing this? Am I the only one that cares about this? It
No.
feels very like we need to have it can feel really unsupported at times.
Yeah. No, we for sure don't have the infrastructure.
Hmm.
Maybe what's sustained me through some of that is if I meet people who clearly need the thing,
Hmm.
then I can go. The problem is the lack of systems to support me, but
Yeah.
it's not that I'm doing a spiritual work nobody has use for,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
I'm the underfunded doctor, right? And the
Yeah.
I know, I've got relatives who practice medicine in India where
Yeah.
like you got to work different because you don't have a lot of resources, but there were
Hmm.
things they could do to heal people. And yeah, as a writer at that center target, right,
Right.
where you're doing by, for, and about, there's not a ton of resources, but there's
Yeah.
need and yeah, I have felt myself drawn again and again to that, even when
Right.
I'm
Nope,
yep.
I agree. I'm there. I find that really relatable.